We have more guidance for Paycheck Protection Loan Forgiveness. Finally. I know I'm a little bit late to the party on this, but I had a lot of questions I wanted to get answers to before I made a full video on this. And many hours of research later, here we are. This is the most comprehensive guide I could possibly come up with to answer all the questions I had and all of the questions that I thought you guys might have, and the application itself. I'm going to go through this application step by step and show you exactly what you need to do in order to increase your odds of full forgiveness. So the SBA on Friday released its Paycheck Protection Loan Forgiveness application. To apply for forgiveness on this loan, you'll have to fill out this application and submit it to your lender. So strap in so you can get familiar with it. I'll have the application linked in the description as well if you need it, which you will if you want to apply for forgiveness. So in this video, I'm going to go over the forgiveness application and give more context on sections that I believe needed a better explanation because it is confusing going through it. This way you can fill out the application along with me and feel confident that you're doing it right. And as a side note here, I'm filming this on May 18th and I'm using the most recent guidance I could find. However, any guidance is subject to changes by the SBA and the Treasury, so just so you're completely aware. So I'll get to the actual application in just a second, but first I need to define covered period and alternative payroll covered period because this is going to come up a whole bunch of times in this application. If you already know what this is, skip ahead a minute for the start of the actual tutorial. As you know, the forgiveness for your paycheck protection loan is based on the 8-week or 56-day period after you receive funding. Well, a major issue with the funding of the Paycheck Protection Program was under the original language, it seemed that only payrolls paid within the 8-week period could potentially be forgiven. So this would cause an accounting nightmare where companies would have to change the dates in which employees were paid in order to actually receive forgiveness for all of the days worked. Because let's say your company pays its employees every other Friday and you receive paycheck protection funding on the Monday before payroll. Under original guidance, those first 4 days, the Monday through Thursday, wouldn't be covered. However, under the new clarified guidance, the SBA said that you'll be able to choose whether the forgiveness period starts the day you receive funding, referred to as the covered period, or you can choose the alternative period to align with your payrolls, referred to as the alternative payroll covered period. If you choose the alternative payroll covered period, that period will begin the first day of the first pay period after you receive paycheck protection funds in your account. So for example, if you received your paycheck protection funds on the 6th of May and your next payroll starts on the 10th of May, you can elect the 8 weeks to start on the 10th of May for payroll expenses only. And the forgiveness period would then extend 56 days from the 10th of May in this scenario, or whatever day you choose in your scenario. So going back to our example of the business who was funded on the 6th, but the next payroll started on the 10th, if that company decides to take the alternative payroll covered period route, which they should in this case, it's important to note that only payroll and payroll related expenses like payroll taxes, health insurance will be covered under the alternative period. Other expenses like rent, mortgage payments, interest, and utilities will still be tracked under the covered period, in this case starting on the 6th of May. That makes it a little bit more confusing, but this is how they want it done. All right, now that we got that covered, let's get right into the actual application. I'm going to use an example business for the purposes of this video. All right, so this application is pretty darn confusing, and I think it's actually easiest if you start about 75% of the way down on the Schedule A worksheet. So I'm going to go through this step by step, hopefully answering any questions that you might have along the way. So starting with employee's name, this is obviously any employees you worked, first and last name. Do not include any independent contractors, owner employees, self-employed individuals, or partners on this. And then the employee identifier, this is just the last 4 digits of their social security number, pretty self-explanatory. Cash compensation, so this one's a little bit nuanced. This is the total gross salary, wages, tips, commissions, paid leave, and sick leave for each individual employee either paid or incurred during the covered period or the alternative payroll covered period, whichever you choose. So incurred means like the day that they worked, even though you may not have necessarily paid it during that period. The cash compensation, however, does not include leave covered by the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, allowances for dismissal or separation, cash compensation in excess or an equivalent annual salary of $100,000. So basically you can't enter more than $15,385 into this box because that's the equivalent of $100,000 a year. And also not included in this is employee health insurance, employee retirement plans, or employer state or local taxes for employee compensation. That will be entered in a different spot. So in this scenario, I just made them all the exact same just to simplify this as much as possible. And finally, the last thing not covered is employee health insurance, employee retirement plans, nor employer state or local taxes. So make sure you don't include those in here. Those will be included later on in this application. Moving on to the average FTE. This one, the instructions are kind of confusing, so let me break it down a little bit more simply for you. All you have to do for this, for each employee, take the average number of hours paid per week, divide that number by 40, and then round that to the nearest tenth. So if they work 40 hours a week, 40 divided by 40 is 1. So that's simple enough. If they work, for example, 30 hours a week, 30 divided by 40 is 0.75, which rounded to the nearest tenth is 0.8. So you would put 0.8 in here. You can do that for whatever hourly amount each individual employee has. They want this so they can compare this to whatever reference period you choose. And we'll go over that more a little bit later. And you'll want this total number to be as close as possible to your reference period, because if it's significantly lower, that can decrease the amount of total loan forgiveness you can receive. So if possible, rehire and give back hours to employees who may have lost them during this period. Salary and wage reduction. So this is the section where the instructions are honestly way too complicated. So let me simplify this a little bit. I understood how this worked before I read over the application, and then after reading the instructions, I was seriously second-guessing myself. So how this works, in any amount you reduce someone's pay by more than 25%, this decreases your total potential forgiveness under the Paycheck Protection Loan dollar for dollar. So anything more than 25% reduces your total forgiveness dollar for dollar. So if I had paid one of these people $5,000 in the reference period, the period before this, and then I paid them $2,500 in this forgiveness period, what you do to figure out how much to deduct is you take the new wage, $2,500, divided by the old wage, $5,000. In this case, that equals 0.5. Then you take 0.5 and subtract 0.25 because we're allowed the 25% reduction, and that equals 0.25. Then you multiply 0.25 by the old wage, which is $5,000, and you get $1,250. So in that case, if I reduce someone's wage from $5,000 to $2,500, I would put $1,250 here and $1,250 here. Rewatch that a few times if you need to. I don't want to make this video super long going over a million examples. So, and then you enter in the total wage reduction for all employees in this box. Then table 2, this is for employees who made more than $100,000 in the reference period. That's annual salary. So if you don't have any employees in this category, you'll just put 0 in both these boxes. If you do, then it's the same as that box above. All right, now we're going to go up to the Paycheck Protection Schedule A portion. That's instructions. Here, Schedule A. So this is when it gets a little bit easier. Enter the cash compensation, box 1 from your Paycheck Protection Schedule A worksheet. So this is what we just did. This is the $30,000. And this is why I'm having you guys start from the bottom, because then you'll have the answers for these questions right away. Enter in the average FTE, box 2. We already got that. In my case, it was 6. Enter the salary, hourly wage reduction. This is what we discussed. This is going to be the total dollar amount above a 25% reduction. In my case, it was 0. enter the cash compensation, box 4 from Schedule A. This is for the employees who earn more than $100,000. In this case, I didn't have that. Same with box 5. In this case, I didn't have that. If you do, then you'll enter it in the same as that other box. This is non-cash compensation. Total amount paid by borrower for employer contributions to employee health insurance. In my case, I just put 0. In your case, whatever you spent in that 8-week period goes there. Line 7, total amount paid by the borrower for employer contributions to employee retirement plans. Again, whatever you paid in that 8-week period, put that there. Finally, total amount paid by borrower for employer state and local taxes assessed on employee compensation. I just put $600 there because that's 2% of the wages. Federal taxes do not go on here. Line 9, total amount paid to owner, employees, self-employed individual, general partners. This amount may not be included in the Paycheck Protection Schedule A worksheet, Table 1 or 2. It says if there's more than one owner or other individual that counts under this to make your own table. However, there's not even a table for one person, so just put your wages in here, your total compensation in here. I just put $10,000 as an example. All right, line 10, payroll costs, add line 1, 4, 6, 7, 8, and 9. That's the sum of these lines in my case. It's pretty simple. 30,000 plus 10,000 plus 600. This is the Fte Reduction Calculation. This is if you lowered the hours by more than 25%. If you didn't lower hours by more than that, then you just check this box and you put a 1 here. That's what I did in this case. If you did, then you put the FTE amount. In my case, that was the 6 here. And then your average FTE for whatever period, reference period you chose, like the 1-year period beforehand. So for example, if this was 6 and this was 10, you'd take 6 divided by 10, and then you put the quotient here, which would be 0.6 in that case. And just as a side note here, the reference periods that you can choose for the past in order to compare these are either February 15th, 2019 to June 30th, 2019, January 1st, 2020 to February 29th, 2020, or in the case of seasonal employees, either you can choose one of those 2 examples I just mentioned, or any consecutive 12-week period between May 1st, 2019 and September 15th, 2019. And a note here is, if you have employees who were fired with cause or refuse to go back to work, this will not hurt your forgiveness factor. This is considered the safe harbor. But you do need to have that in writing. So make sure if you fire someone for cause, you have it in writing, or if someone refuses to come back to work, they sign something that's saying they're refusing to come back to work. Otherwise, you may not receive that same forgiveness. All right, now let's scroll up to where they wanted you to start this application and fill out this info. So business legal name, just put in whatever legal name you applied on the application with. Business EIN, simple enough. Business address, email, primary contact, SBA paycheck protection loan number, whatever number they gave you, whatever loan number your lender gave you, the day you received funds, the loan amount, employees at the time of the loan, employees at the time of forgiveness, EIDL advance amount, enter in whichever amount you received. In this case, I just wrote 0. EIDL application number, pretty self-explanatory. Your payroll schedule, I wasn't able to check these boxes, but whichever one applies to you. I wasn't able to check one of these boxes. And this is where you choose either the covered period or the alternative payroll covered period. I didn't mean to write this here. So the alternative, just make sure it's a 56-day period that you choose if you go with either one. Make sure you calculate that out, 56 days. Now this is where you do the actual calculations for the loan forgiveness amount. Now these are pretty self-explanatory in that you already have most of these numbers. So payroll costs, you're just adding the line 10 from below. Mortgage interest payments, in this case I just wrote 0, I have no mortgage. Business rent or lease payments, $6,000. Now this is for the entire 8-week period for all of these. Business utility payments, $1,000 for the 8-week period. Total salary and hourly wage reduction, this is the total dollar amount that we talked about earlier, that's above 25% reduction. This is adding lines 1, 2, 3, and 4. and then subtract the amount entered in line 5. So we're just adding those. I had nothing to subtract in this. Fte reduction quotient, I didn't have that, so we just put 1. If you do have a quotient like 0.6, then you put that there. Modified total, this is where that FTE quotient comes in. If this was 0.5, for instance, that's when this would reduce your forgiveness to, $23,000 in sum. This is your total paycheck protection loan amount, pretty self-explanatory. Payroll cost, 75% requirement. So in order to get this, you take line 1 and you divide that by 0.75, which in my case is 54,133. And then finally, the forgiveness amount. This is just the smallest of one of these three, and that is likely the amount of forgiveness you'll actually receive. In my case, that is $47,600. The reason it's not the full $50,000 is because we simply didn't spend that much. So there was just $3,000 left over. All right, now we just have some agreements to initial. The first one is stating that the funds were spent correctly and in the right proportions. The second one, you understand that you may get pursued if you spend the funds incorrectly. Third one, payroll is verified. The fourth one is saying you had submitted the required docs to your lender when you were applying for this loan. The fifth one, the information is all true and correct, otherwise you're going to go to jail forever. The sixth one, the tax documents are accurate and consistent. Seventh, the SBA may request information to verify what you had provided. And then finally, just sign it and date it. Now let's go to the bottom and look at what you need to provide with this paperwork. Keep on scrolling. All right, so for payroll, you'll need bank statements proving payroll costs. You'll need payroll tax forms, 941s, and payroll summaries. You'll need receipts or statements for employee health insurance or retirement, and your lender may require you to provide proof of full-time employees for prior periods. For non-payroll items, you'll need to be able to prove mortgage or rent payments, utility payments, and interest payments with documentation. Finally, keep record of all these worksheets, and if any employee refuses to come back to work or you fire someone with cause, make sure you have that in writing. So finally, you can fill out this form at the bottom. You can do what you please there if you want to fill it out or not. And that's the entire application. But let me give you a couple more updates before we go. For forgiveness, these are really important notes, and then you can be on your way with forgiveness. For forgiveness on expenses like interest, rent, and utilities, you don't have to pay for these expenses exactly during the 8-week period in order to have them considered for forgiveness. A piece from the forgiveness application states, an eligible non-payroll cost must be paid during the covered period or incurred during the covered period and paid on or before the next regular billing date, even if the billing date is after the covered period. Basically what this is saying is if your forgiveness period ends on, let's say, the 25th of the month, and you pay your bill that covers that same month 6 days later on the 1st, that expense would still be included in forgiveness, which is awesome news. That just means more days are covered under your actual forgiveness. This is to say, if it is a forgivable expense, you still unfortunately can't go buy a Rolex and have it forgiven like that other guy tried to do. And then the last tip for some final clarification, we know that in order to have your loan completely forgiven, at least 75% of the total expenses must go to payroll. This caused a lot of confusion for people who thought that meant if you spent 74% on payroll, you would receive no forgiveness. This is not the case. Basically what they're saying is only 25% of the forgiveness can go to non-payroll expenses. So here's an example. Let's say you received a $100,000 PPP loan and spent $60,000 on payroll and $40,000 on non-payroll expenses. You should receive $85,000 in forgiveness. To figure this out, all you have to do is take your total loan amount times 0.25. That's the amount you can spend on non-payroll items and receive full forgiveness. Anything over that amount will be considered a regular loan at a 1% interest rate. Still could be a good choice for many people. I mean, you really can't get cheaper capital anywhere else. And finally, this concludes my comprehensive guide on paycheck protection forgiveness. Man, when I saw this application, I thought, nice, I'll be able to knock out a quick video on this, update my people, and then I took a look at the actual application, and it caused more confusion than answers at first. So here we are like 6 hours later, and I'm wrapping this up. Hopefully this is an easy to follow guide. If you appreciate this video, it would mean the world to me. If you considered subscribing, I would appreciate it so very much. Until next time, I'd like to thank you for watching, and I hope you have a profitable day.